It's very nice to be here and to be able to present some of the findings that of the paper that my co-author and I, Joël Noailly, published in the Energy Policy Journal. And I'm going to focus mostly on the policy implication and give a little bit of an overview of how green patterns have developed over the past, over the samplest period that we have from 2004 to 2008, and in relation to offshoring. So Ulrich already mentioned some of the key features or key terms that you have to know: R&D, offshoring, outsourcing, so I'm not going to get back to that. But we were motivated mostly by the significant increase of R&D budget that is spent outside the home countries of multinational companies. And there has been, since the mid-90s, as Ulrich already mentioned, there has been a strong increase in that. And while most of the offshoring is still between OECD countries, there has also been an increase towards emerging economies. And Joël and I like to mention in one of the several anecdotal evidences here, and that is in 2012, General Motors opened a research center in Shanghai in China for lightweight vehicles and electric vehicles, and their motivation, they stated, was that China has now the largest supply of researchers with a PhD, and in addition to that, that China has a very important supply of magnesium, important for batteries, and it is very close to other important automobile producers who are already located in China. So there is both some kind of empirical evidence that there's an increase in R&D offshoring, and there's also anecdotal evidence. Nonetheless, green innovation is still highly concentrated mostly in the US, Germany, and Japan. Why multinational corporations? Well, the 700 largest multinational corporations, they are responsible for 70% of all R&D expenditure. Then there's some underlying economic theory as well, which motivated us to look into this topic, is that knowledge spillover, which is often the outcome of R&D, because knowledge is of very tested nature, as in the direct exchange between scientists is the best way to transmit the knowledge. So that's why it is so interesting that the idea of R&D offshoring, because it can contribute significantly in the host country to an augmentation in productivity through innovation and thus economic growth. Well, and when it comes to green technologies, well, of course, they have an important role in climate change mitigation. When it comes to knowledge spillover, again, and multinational corporations, one could think, well, through IPR and their internal structures, they are able to secure their knowledge. But evidently, there is always some kind of loss of knowledge as a knowledge spillover to local firms, which they cannot protect from. That is, to customers, suppliers, and competitors. So we wanted to present a first empirical evidence of the drivers of this globalization of green R&D, and where to and what are the determinants. So we looked into existing theory that is relevant to to our study. And we looked into 3 different strands of literature, which is, the first one is in international business, where there has been some empiric evidence, but mostly it's anecdotal, it's case studies, and but nothing on green R&D offshoring yet. Then the second one, both Joel and I, we're economists, so we had an incentive to look into trade and FDI literature. And then, last but not least, the international diffusion of green technologies, which is an important field in environmental economics. So, based on these trends, we try to identify some key determinants that would be important for our empirical analysis. So, one common term that has been found in the international business literature is home-based or asset-exploiting R&D offshoring. That is, if a company decides to go to another market with the idea of exploring the technologies that they have at home, and there is one of their core strengths, to adapt it somehow to the local market, and thus you make use of that market potential. So in the first item, it's mostly about the market potential. The second one is technology sourcing. The idea there is to open a research lab center in the host country to benefit from local knowledge capabilities. So there it might be more important is what is the knowledge base, for example in green technologies, but also other technologies, because green technologies largely depend also on other technological fields, and what is the supply of researchers, etc. What is was to be thought most like so far is that the home base asset exploiting is more relevant when companies decide to locate in developing countries, for new markets, to approach new markets, and technology sourcing in other similar developed countries. Following through with the trade and FDI literature, there's the idea that foreign direct investment to emerging markets is done because labor is cheaper. Well, in R&D offshoring, for the longest time, that has not been found because it was mostly cross-OECD, as we will see. Then, of course, there's a risk of imitation, as I said, due to knowledge spillover, so intellectual property rights are considered important. And there's a trade-off between proximity and concentration, because, we want to concentrate, in theory, our production and R&D in the same place for economies of scale and to reduce cost of communication, but then proximity to the new market might outweigh actually the cost of moving there. And then last but not least, from the international diffusion of green technologies, there we got the idea that environmental policy and regulations may be an important determinant as to where companies would like to locate. So, as I said, I will not go much into the empirics, into the econometric underlying theory, but we combined patent data from the Orbis database and with firm level data. And I would like to start by giving you an idea which countries offshore and what is the country of origin and what is the country of destination. So that's more descriptive before we enter the determinants. So what we see is that offshoring is still dominated by multinational companies from OECD countries. And you can see that it is largely the Americans, Germans, French, Japanese, but also some smaller open economies like Denmark, like the Netherlands, like Switzerland. And if we actually look at the number of offshore patents per GDP unit, it's actually these smaller open economies like Denmark and Netherlands that are the most active in terms of R&D offshoring. Well, that can be the case in some countries, like the Netherlands, that is attributable to one real champion, national champion. In the case of the Netherlands, it's Philips, for example. Philips has the largest number of offshore patents across all multinationals, and they account for nearly all of the Dutch offshore patents. In Denmark, it's Vestas. Vestas plays a large role, and they have 1/3 of all Danish offshore patents, just to remind you, within the sample period that we looked at. And then, well, Japan is the strongest innovator. Like, Japanese multinational corporations is the strongest innovator, but because they do not tend to be so active into offshoring, they just rank 4th, which is still a relatively high number, but in terms of their share, with regard to their total number of patents, it's rather small. Up to 2008, between 2000 and 2008, China was the only emerging economy which themselves was home to multinational corporations that offshored. So if we look at technologies, and originally I know there was the idea to focus a little bit on biomass, we looked at 25 technologies in total, which we followed the work by the OECD, who ranked patents according to their IPC code into 25 green technologies, which can be more or less divided into renewable energy, energy efficiency, energy efficient fossil fuel, electricity production, and well, storage as well. And as you can see, cycles and wind are those who have the largest share of offshore green patents. The average across technologies is 17%. In our sample, that means 7,000 offshore green patents of a total of 40,000. That is in 1,700 multinational corporations. Biomass, though it ranks slightly above the average, in our sample period, it had very few firms that actually offshored and also very few offshore patents. So what are the destination countries for the offshoring activities? It is the US, China, and Germany are the 3 leading destinations. And apart from that, apart from these 3 big players, it's mostly Western and Northern Europe. So as I said, OECD countries. India, Russia, Brazil, as part of the BRIC, are still not so prevalent in terms of destinations up to 2008. Interesting, Australia, Great Britain, Canada largely benefit from activities of US companies. So there might be a hint that common language, common cultural background might favor the location decision. That is the overall, that is across these 25 technologies. If we look into specific technologies, there can be differences. For example, when it comes to wind technology, Ulrich mentioned Senvion, when it comes to wind technology, India, for example, ranks amongst the top 10 of offshore green patents. When it comes to solar, interesting, Morocco is amongst the first 10. So you can see that some countries might have certain characteristics that make it more likely in one technology or the other to locate there. That is one of the suggestions we make at the end of our paper, is that further research could look more specifically into one or the other technology while we look across the board. So Very quick, I already mentioned most of it. When we look at the bilateral connections, Japanese and Taiwanese firms offshore in China, green patents. Then the strongest bilateral relation we have between Germany and US in both directions. And yeah, it's nearly all are in the OECD. I go over that quickly so that we come to the results. So we tested, we designed an empirical work and we looked for the determinants that we had determined through the literature. And interestingly, our results really were closely aligned with the different literatures that we looked in. First one, market size. Market size matters. So the larger the market, the more likely it is for a company to offshore into that market. Which just makes sense because companies need to make up for the cost that they have by locating R&D in that country. Stringency of environmental regulation, and that is very interesting because we talk about green technologies. Green technologies often, except for a few other technologies, still, due to externalities, etc., have a higher cost than fossil fuel-based technologies. So markets can create it through environmental regulation. So if a country has a stringent environmental regulation, it is likely that there's a larger market demand for one of the green technologies. Is this always a precondition? While we found a correlation between environmental regulation and offshore green patents, there were some outliers. China, for example, is still lagging behind and still is a major destination. Morocco, as I mentioned as well, also an outlier. But in general, this correlation closely holds. R&D intensity, what does that mean? R&D intensity, we talk about like the technological and capacity of the potential host country. And there we talk about high-skilled scientists, engineers, and the supply of these is important, similar to also the knowledge stock that is available in the country, as in green knowledge stock. And so that proves favorable because companies have an incentive to move there because they will have the preconditions necessary to research. Wage differential, which was in general found to have a weak evidence so far, we found that it does make a difference. And that can be closely related also to the case that I mentioned on General Motors, that, for example, in China, there's now such a large supply of high-skilled workers that the larger supply, by idea of supply and demand, there's actually a lower wage, and then it makes sense as one of the incentives to go there. Proximity, yes, distance is negatively affects the likelihood of offshoring, because even though we live in communication IT times with the internet, apparently there's still a cost associated with distance, due probably to the tested nature of knowledge. Language, same language is favorable because it reduces coordination cost. EU membership, we checked what about EU membership, and the EU membership is favorable. And a more stringent IPR system, which is also still should be looked deeper into, because it might depend whether it's technology sourcing or asset exploiting where it makes a difference. So I come already to the policy implications. I mentioned already the role of environmental policy, and that is it can be very important to green offshoring due to the created market. And if we look a little bit into the history, in Denmark through the investment subsidy for wind, in Germany through the policies related to the Energiewende. Like there is evidence that like these policies are favorable for innovation. And what is important when it comes to environmental policy regulation, it should also be consistent, because investment in innovation is long-term. It's nothing that is short-term. So it should be a long-term commitment by countries towards a more stringent environmental policy. Then, in the environmental economics, it is shown that they work best when environmental policies work in tandem with innovation policies. And innovation policies is, for example, R&D tax credits, setting up an innovation lab, creating, like providing high-skilled worker. Whether that has to be specialized in green technologies, unclear. More general, high-skilled workers, especially also because many green technologies depend on technologies that are outside the green field. So those are the key messages that I would like everyone to take out of this, is the potential for environmental policy and innovation policy in a tandem to attract green R&D, and that many countries, due to the growth potential of innovation and knowledge, should be interested in creating a policy mix that is favorable for the location of green R&D. Because what we found is that there's rather a pollution halo effect rather than the pollution haven effect. So that is what we found. With regard to wage differences and IPR, as I said, there's more to look into, and that will probably happen. But it's these two messages that are clear and that should be of interest to all policymakers. Well, thank you for the opportunity, and yeah.